Great. Well, I think we'll make a start. I'd like to say good morning to everybody and welcome you to our webinar on how to deliver a green and just recovery from COVID-19. The webinar, as you'll have seen from the introductory information, brings together leading figures in the world of policy and finance to identify the strategies and mechanisms the UK is going to need to deploy in order to ensure that public and finance both play their part in accelerating action to combat climate change and the ecological emergency in a socially just way. My name is Sophia Tikel. I am a strategic advisor to the Just Transition, Financing a Just Transition project and a co-author of the recent report, Financing Climate Action with Positive Social Impact. And the webinar will build on that report. And I'll be moderating today's session. A few housekeeping points to start with. The webinar is an hour and a half, so we'll run till 12:30. Could everyone mute themselves when they're not speaking? And could our presenters remember to unmute at the start of their presentations and when they're answering questions? If you would like to ask a question, we're going to ask you to use the chat function and state your name and affiliation ahead of your question. And if you could keep your questions as short as possible, that would be great, because we'd like to get as many in as possible. Could everyone in the audience please turn off their video and their audio so that we can see our speakers speaking? Thank you very much. Some delightful locations are disappearing from view as I speak. So a brief run through on today's session. We are going to hear a keynote presentation from Caroline Lucas MP on why changes in public and private finance are needed, and that's going to be followed by Professor Nick Robbins, Professor in Practice, who is a co-author of the report and is going to be giving us an overview of the landscape of place-based finance. After that, we're going to have three expert panelists: Bruce Davis, co-founder of Abundance, who is going to talk about the potential of local authority bonds; Andy Gouldson, who is Professor of Environment Policy at Leeds University and also the chair of the Leeds Climate Commission, who's going to be talking about how cities can mobilise finance. And then we have Casey Rayner, who is a climate finance expert and a member of the Edinburgh Climate Commission, who's going to help us think about what's needed to get banks and investors to invest in place-based action. So if you wouldn't mind turning off your videos if you are not a speaker, please. Thank you very much. And then we will move to Caroline. Caroline, thank you so much. And if people who are in the webinar would like a speaker view, then please turn on at the top right-hand corner of your screen. I'm sure everybody knows this already. You will get the speaker view and then Caroline will come into full glory. Caroline, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sophia. Hello, everybody, and thank you to the team for the invitation to today's important event. I'm looking forward to the discussion and to taking some of your collective wisdom back into Parliament, not least because there's a budget and a spending review both on the horizon. The Grantham Research Institute is truly a leading light in expert analysis and practical policy solutions for the zero carbon transition. And that couldn't be more important than it is today. I think it's no secret that climate action and reducing inequality are currently not at the heart of the UK's economic recovery plans. Earlier this year, IPPR's Environmental Justice Commission, of which I'm a co-chair, called for an additional £30 billion investment per year in shovel-ready green projects to get on track with our climate targets. Shortly thereafter, the Treasury announced a £3 billion package for the green economy. It's a fraction of what's required and frankly pitiful compared to the billions being funneled into reviving the old economy, adding to carbon emissions, pollution and social harm. One example is the Bank of England's support for aviation, automotive and oil and gas services. Another is the Treasury's own £27 billion road building plans. It's pitiful too, frankly, compared with other countries. Both France and Germany have allocated around 4% of their GDP to green recovery plans. And I think the UK plan amounts to around 0.2% of GDP. Now, the Chancellor claimed to be launching what he called a green recovery with concern for the environment at its heart. But I think the figures speak for themselves. Now, I know that Nick likes to say that perhaps that £3 billion was simply the starter, the hors d'oeuvre, if you like. And I hope he's right. Thanks, Chancellor, for the chunk of cheese and pineapple on a stick. But now we need the main course in the budget and in the spending review. So I want to touch on 3 areas on how we could make that happen. First, to share some headline findings of the Reset Inquiry. These were launched yesterday by the all-party parliamentary group on the Green New Deal, which I co-chair. And I think they give some real insight into the strength of the mandate for a greener, fairer and kinder society. Second, I'll highlight a few examples of what a finance sector that supports a just and green recovery would look like. New institutions on the high street, new laws on the statute book. And third, if the finance system serves the economy, I think we can't ignore the question of who and what the economy itself is designed to serve and how that needs to change too. So first to the Reset Inquiry. The APPG on a Green New Deal has spent the summer asking people what they want to see from a post-COVID society and economic recovery. And we found that they want fairness and they want more government intervention to achieve that. They told us they want revitalised and multifunctional local high streets, better wages and conditions for key workers, less traffic, less homelessness, more green spaces, more local food, more time. Notably, we found that 2/3 of UK adults want the government to prioritise the health and well-being of citizens over GDP growth, with only 1 in 5 thinking that growth should remain the UK's main economic goal. Now, those findings are perhaps not surprising, but they do echo, I think, the focus of today's event, the importance of place-based approaches. They show the value of deliberative democracy, and they provide a snapshot of public priorities for what the economic recovery should be designed to deliver. But in the context of today's meeting, I think they also point to the invisibility of finance in how people think about their lives, about recovery, about the climate. And there wasn't much focus actually on the financial side of people's lives in the recent Citizens' Assembly on climate either. No mention in their report, for example, about pensions. So it seems that when you ask people what they want, reform of the finance system isn't top of their list. The second output from this Reset Inquiry is going to be a policy report next month. And while that will look at finance, I think the public disconnect when it comes to thinking about how finance fits into their lives, fits into the recovery, is something that we might explore further. Turning now to how the finance sector can deliver a green and just recovery, I wanted to highlight just a few priorities. Firstly, fairly obviously, a publicly owned national investment bank. And if one could be permitted an "I told you so" moment, then I think all of us who said 3 years ago that flogging off the Green Investment Bank was a disastrous idea have been proved right. We need a public investment bank to leverage and de-risk more green investment with the application of strict criteria, ruling out all fossil fuels in their entirety, for example. And they need to take in the biodiversity crisis too, since nature restoration rarely gets the priority it deserves. It should have a mandate to promote regional and local investment, especially in less prosperous parts of the UK, and explicitly address the need for rural transition and agroecology. Alongside that, we need to see the development of a network of smaller local and regional banks. We need to ensure the FCA has a duty to facilitate these diverse new forms of banking, public, cooperative, and community-owned. There could be a national network, but it needs to be firmly embedded in local communities and responsive to their needs. And with over 270 local councils and 8 city regions now having declared a climate emergency, there should be no shortage of demand. The Reset Inquiry heard expert evidence on local banking from people who are making it happen in the real world. Above all, Tony Greenham, who set up Southwest Mutual. We heard that one barrier, for example, is raising equity capital. So why couldn't the government offer tax relief or even provide some of that startup capital directly? Thirdly, green bond schemes. Now, some already exist, but we need them to be far more widely available. One brilliant example is the new community municipal investments or local green bonds from West Berkshire and Warrington, pioneered by Abundance, as I'm sure we'll hear from Bruce shortly. But imagine if every local authority that has declared a climate emergency was benefiting from these instruments to tap local savings for local action. That is a vision that surely politicians from all parties could get behind. Strict green bond standards, I think, are also essential to remove the risk of greenwashing and provide stability in markets. And the EU seems to be showing some real leadership here with a green bond certification scheme. Fourth, pensions, a really tangible way to engage with the financial system. It's been wonderful to see the divestment campaigns proliferate, often kicked off by churches and faith groups and student groups too. And even the Divest Parliament campaign is finally, I'm pleased to report, making some progress. But there is a long way to go. Research by Share Action looked at the climate approach of 16 of the largest UK pension schemes, managing over £34 billion. It revealed that fully 14 of the 16 were not directly engaging with global companies on their role in the climate crisis. And yet the potential resource that could be tapped from existing savings and pensions is enormous, and an estimated 4 billion of investable wealth per 100,000 population in the UK. Now, the new climate disclosure rules for the UK's pension sector are welcome. Pension fund holders should receive crystal clear information about how their money is being invested, as the Make My Money Matter campaign is calling for. And we need to make the most as well of the opportunity to push for improvements when the pension bill comes to Parliament. On green savings more broadly, the Treasury has increased the net financing target for national savings and investment from 6 billion to 35 billion. Now, these could and should be green savings channeled to funding the green recovery. And fifth, it seems to me that corporate governance has a major role to play. We can't just rely on the climate leaders of the finance sector to turn this around. Government needs to change the rules of the game. It could legislate, for example, to change the default model of company purpose set out in Section 172 of the Companies Act, to require all companies to seek to ensure at a minimum that their business activities have a positive impact on society and the environment alongside benefit to shareholders. In other words, rather than simply refrain from doing more damage, we need a positive responsibility to regenerate. Investors, meanwhile, could demand that Paris alignment when it comes to net zero, resilience, a just transition, are added to companies' articles of association, not just as an ambition, but as a clear commitment. And as a challenge, I think, for the Bank of England as well. Its mission is currently extraordinarily broad, to promote the good of the people of the UK by maintaining monetary and financial stability. So why not redefine the good of the people so that it clearly establishes the right to a safe and equitable future? And that way, we could create more leverage for a more transformative system and action. And finally, the last point I want to make is a broader one about the purpose of the economic system within which our financial institutions operate. It's old news that GDP growth is a shockingly poor measure of a nation's economic success. Yet only now does it feel like we're reaching a tipping point. As the school striker Greta Thunberg told world leaders at the UN Climate Summit last year, we are in the beginning of a mass extinction and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. Just this week, yet another report, this time for the OECD, again catalogues the harm caused by this pursuit of GDP growth as the be-all and end-all of our economic objectives. And it calls for GDP to be replaced by 4 better objectives for economic policy making: environmental sustainability, improving well-being, reducing inequality, and strengthening resilience. While Westminster is well behind the curve on well-being economics, change is happening. From the Wellbeing Economy Governments Partnership to Amsterdam adopting the donut as its guide to the city's development during and after COVID. As Kate Rayworth told the Reset Inquiry, economics will be practiced first and theorised later. Undoubtedly, I think the same goes for the finance sector too. And I'm sure the doers and thinkers among you already have many of the solutions to drive the systemic shift that we so urgently need to see. So urgency is where I'll end. The UK hosting COP26 next year is certainly focusing some ministerial minds, but we can't wait. As a warning from 11,000 climate scientists in November stated, the climate crisis has arrived and it's accelerating faster than most scientists expected. It is more severe than anticipated, threatening natural ecosystems and the fate of humanity. So despite its world-beating rhetoric, the government isn't even on track to deliver its current climate goals. So this autumn and no later, we need a real green stimulus, accompanied by practical financial instruments and institutions capable of delivering real change right across the UK. In every town, every village, and every city, people need to see and feel the shift to a greener, fairer, and kinder way of life. And I look forward to hearing more from you in the rest of this session about the role that the financial system can play and how crucially politicians can help to ensure that that happens. Thank you.
Caroline, thank you so much. And having watched Siberia on fire last night on last night's news, and all the impact on the permafrost, urgency feels like the order of the day. So that was very clear about what is a potential portfolio of things that we could do. Nick, how close are we to this reality? What's happening from your perspective on a place-based finance?
Well, thanks so much for kicking us off, Caroline. It's a really fantastic agenda, and I think gives us a sense of the urgency of what we need to do. But I think what I'll be trying to do in the next few minutes is to sort of give you a sense of what we've been finding out at the LSE, working with the University of Leeds and with the Place-Based Climate Action Network, and many of you on the call today, just in terms of the agenda around finance and place-based action, and particularly seen through the lens of just transition, how we can connect both environmental goals and also social justice. So I'm going to very unwisely perhaps use a PowerPoint. This will be available to all of you, and I'll just put it up now. So I'm going to take about 10 minutes to sort of looking at this agenda and highlighting some of the things we found. And I think, again, hopefully building on what Caroline's been saying, looking at some of the practical options that we can take. So the Place-Based Climate Action Network is now well underway. We have a finance platform, particularly focusing on mobilising investment for a just transition, and then one that harnesses the local dimension of ambitious action across the UK. I think what is so striking is how actually local action is often more ambitious than national. So actually the local dimension is really important. To do this, we have been listening, talking, consulting across the country, in Belfast, in Edinburgh and Leeds, the three core climate commissions of PCAN, but also in Birmingham, Bristol, Cardiff, in Cornwall, and in London. And we've been asking really, how can financial institutions incorporate a place-based focus as part of the support for a just transition, pensions funds, banks, and also community development finance organizations, and also what sort of instruments do we need, what sort of new instruments, how to adapt existing instruments to scale up capital. And finally, what do we need from policy, both local policy and national policy, particularly in the context of the COVID crisis and the recovery from that. In terms of the just transition, this has been a relatively new phrase for the financial community, came out of the Labour movement, and to ensure that particularly workers and communities that are affected by the transition to a green economy benefit, and also that no one is left behind. I think in terms of climate finance, the finance sector is moving on from focusing on the climate risk, sort of seizing some of the green opportunities in renewables, energy efficiency, increasingly thinking about resilience, and now recognizing that a sort of strong social dimension is absolutely crucial. And this, I think, COVID-19 has really propelled the just transition to the forefront, and leading to more recognition of that as being an essential element of progress. In the work we've been doing, talking with people across the country in finance and outside, these have appeared, these three pillars have appeared as the main dimensions we need to talk about. Clearly, just transition is about being inclusive, responding to needs of stakeholders, workers, communities. Small businesses have come through very strongly as an area of concern. Again, a sector of the economy very much under pressure through the COVID crisis, but also consumers and citizens. Then clearly it needs to be place-based. The transition will not happen equally across the economy, and we need to think about how we can connect this drive for net zero and resilience with goal of levelling up economic and social prospects. And then sector specific. The transition, the just transition will be very different in agriculture, in construction, where we see the most change needed, in manufacturing, in energy and transport and so on. So we're going to be focusing here particularly on the place-based dimension, but recognising that these two other pillars are equally important. In the work we've been doing at Grantham Research Institute, but also in partnership with the University of Leeds, we've been looking particularly about trying to get a sense of the scale of the issue, particularly through the lens of employment and skills. And this is, if you can see this, results produced by Andrew Gouldson, sorry, Andrew Soudmont and Andy Gouldson, really looking at the top 10% of constituencies for multiple deprivation on the left there, and seeing how they are exposed to the employment impacts of the transition. Now, the transition, as we know, has huge positive upsides, and about sort of 10% of jobs in the economy will see increased demand for skills. And as we can see in some of these constituencies, such as Kingston upon Hull in the Yorkshire and Humber region, there'll be an 18% uplift in terms of new and in-demand jobs. So that's really great. But also there will be some jobs who have skills which will fall in demand. So that's where we need to focus our efforts in terms of reskilling, training, and also sort of regional revitalization efforts. And just in terms of sort of where these particular efforts are going to be needed, Yorkshire and Humber come through, West Midlands, a couple of constituencies in Scotland, 3 in fact, but also in London. So again, quite broad based, but basically the industrial heartland of the UK, Yorkshire and Humber and the Midlands, both having greatest upside, but also where greatest attention perhaps needs to be placed on sort of reskilling and revitalisation. So in terms of institutions, we've been working with a number of investors across the country. About 30 UK investors are now signed up to a general statement of support for the just transition. This is now leading to action, using the investor voice to encourage companies not only to have commitments to net zero, but also to do that through just transition. And at their recent annual general meeting, Scottish and Southern SSE made a commitment to introduce a just transition plan. So I think that's again an interesting example of positive shareholder action. In terms of capital allocation, how investors are changing, I think pension funds have shown a lot of interest in this agenda, particularly local authority pension funds, and one pension fund I think that is doing some very interesting work, in particular on the place-based side, is the Greater Manchester Pension Fund, which has some of its portfolio directly invested in the Northwest to generate sort of positive social and environmental impact. Clearly, investors also need to use their voice in the policy framework, not just on the environmental side, but also calling for a strategic framework for just transition. And then I think there was a recognition, finally, that we need to find ways of for investors to listen and learn and partner with stakeholders. So that's the investor side, and as I say, a number of investors really scaling up their action on just transition. Turning to banks, this was the work that we've been most recently working on, with, again, the University of Leeds, but also in this case with UK Finance, and a process of thinking about what the banking sector and the broader financial system can do in terms of just transition. This work started before COVID and landed after COVID. And again, I think the urgency of the just transition in place came through very, very strongly when we launched this in July. Sort of what banks can do, and I think these are some of the key points for action by banks. Board leadership, and we have 8 CEOs of 8 UK banks signalling their leadership on this. Clearly strategy, we need an action plan with clear milestones, a real focus on different customer needs, and Sophia and I prepared 2 separate briefings really looking at the housing sector, particularly domestic housing, and also the SME sector, small business sector. This point of place, which we're discussing today, came through very, very strongly, particularly from our regional dialogues, and the question about how banks, large and small, could become anchor institutions in their localities. Policy, again, and I'll come to some of the policy recommendations we came in, really the need for this system-wide innovation, and discussions about how banks and other financial institutions can incorporate the human dimension of the transition, the just transition, into their reports through things such as the Task Force on Climate-Related Disclosures. So those are some of the key findings, and I'm happy to discuss those later. One thing to mention is in this process on banking, we had a very diverse group of institutions involved in very different ways, from large shareholder banks through to smaller purpose-driven organizations and indeed public financial institutions. And I think that shows us a richness and breadth of agencies involved, and we were partnering with UK Finance. Many others who were involved with us, as well as these whose logos on the screen just now. I mentioned policy. Clearly, we're going to need policy to help signal direction, and particularly at the time of crisis. And these are 6 areas that we think are particularly important in terms of driving forward on the net zero transition, ensuring it's connected to the just transition, and particularly using this moment of crisis to point where we need to go in the future. So 6 areas just to briefly touch on. First, in terms of government commitment, both locally and also nationally, and particularly thinking through at the national level what this means in terms of just transition sector plans, particularly those sectors which have been particularly exposed to the crisis, aviation, oil and gas, and so on. So really thinking in quite a sector focus. In terms of the expanded stimulus we're going to need to see, I think in the autumn, there's a 2-3 billion particularly focused on green home loans and so on, very, very welcome. But a more broad-based stimulus was going to be needed across the economy to get this move underway. Public finance, I think it's important that all public finance institutions really show leadership. So the British Business Bank, the role that they can play, particularly in regions, particularly working with SMEs in terms of net zero and just transition, but also new institutions, as Caroline also mentioned, a national investment bank, which would help really to create some of the new markets and reduce the risk so that other investors come on behind, pension funds and so on. In terms of regulation, one thing that we pointed to, that particularly in terms of place, the Bank of England will be conducting a now delayed sort of first stress test, and these could generate quite interesting results at a local and regional level in terms of what this means, and particularly if there are particular sort of hotspots of areas that are particularly exposed. And then financial innovation. We'll hear from Bruce about the community municipal bonds, but I think at a national level, a sovereign bond issued by the government to finance the recovery program would be particularly valuable. And that could be designed in a way that both channeled savings into public spending on the green side, but also to ensure that also led to social renewal. Here we're talking a lot about the UK and particularly about the place-based dimension UK, but I think there is a real potential to connect this with COP26, as Caroline was saying, and there's a lot of interest about not only what a just transition means here in the UK, but also particularly in major developing countries, India, South Africa, and so on. So I'm going to finish here, just to sort of some steps in terms of the things that we're thinking of, would like to work with you on the call. Firstly, this moment of the COVID recovery and the big decisions that we'll need to make this autumn. The government will be coming forward with a budget, a national infrastructure plan, and also a spending plan. And this really clearly needs to be fully aligned with a green and just recovery and enabling local action. Then there's work really for financial institutions, as I mentioned, growing numbers of financial institutions committing not just to net zero, but to just transition, and working, we'll be really keen to work with those institutions to translate their commitments into new investment strategies and financial products for key customers. As I mentioned, SMEs and households a key priority. And then the focus for the debate today, really thinking about how we generate place-based financial innovation and how we can design tailored financial plans and mechanisms, potential prospectuses delivered by different local authorities, and then the international action I highlighted. Building on this work we've been doing and the momentum I think we're seeing, we are now establishing a financing, the Just Transition group of financial institutions, but other stakeholders in terms of policy, in terms of NGOs, and also in terms of trade unions. And we'd really like to have your input into this and deliver some concrete results into COP26. This presentation will be available, and there are many other links to our work that it contains. But I'm going to stop there, Sophia, and pass back to you.
Thank you so much, Nick. Absolutely fascinating and really interesting that we are talking about place-based, and place-based will be dependent both on things that are happening at a national level and at a more local and a regional level. So I'm really happy to invite all the panelists now to turn on their cameras and the videos and their microphones. And we have Bruce Davis here, a reminder, a co-founder of Abundance, Andy Gouldson from the University of Leeds, Professor of Environmental Policy, and Casey Rayner from Edinburgh, a climate finance expert, a member of the Edinburgh Climate Commission. And I'm going to invite each of them to present briefly some ideas about what the bottom-up regional dimension of this looks like, how practically to get this going at a regional level, and then we will open it up to the wider discussion. So Bruce, perhaps we could start with you, please.
Sure. Yeah, so Abundance, we were set up 10 years ago, really, with a really clear purpose that's aligned with this, which is around accelerating the transition to net zero by encouraging green investment from the general public. And really, in those last 10 years, we've raised about 110 million, mainly into companies, backing industries such as the UK title industry. But looking forward, we're also now looking at how that can be used to fund things like the transition in food production. But about 4 years ago, we started looking at also the role that local authorities would play, because we saw them as very much on the front line of the response to the climate emergency. And we also started to see local authorities declaring climate emergencies. We did a piece of work with Mark Davis at Leeds University called Financing for Society, where we looked in detail really how we could harness local authorities' ability to raise money and invest in their local environment to support that overall purpose. Because for us, we feel it's very important, and something that's quite often overlooked in financial innovation is that it's really, as an organization, you're delivering a purpose. Your function should really follow that. And it's always a frustration that when we've looked at issues in the financial system, whether that's post the financial crisis or even now with the FCA sort of reviewing the various ways that retail investment works, there's very little discussion around purpose and an awful lot of discussion around function of the system. And we saw that actually local authorities have potential to be exactly that, a sort of a purpose-led financial institutions in their own right. And in fact, they've been that way for 150 years. The first local authority loans that were sold to the public were called Goshen loans, and that was back in 1870. So what we then saw through that research that we did with Mark Davis was come up with an approach that would allow local authorities to borrow from local residents and invest that money into projects, green projects, and longer term social infrastructure, but particularly focusing on green. And there were certain things that came out of that research that sort of were required really for local authorities to be able to do that. The first is that these were simple, because local authorities don't have the capacity to take on complex financial processes necessarily, something that saves them money. So the source of finance had to be better value than borrowing from the UK government, which is how at the moment a lot of local authority borrowing for investment infrastructure takes place through the Public Works Loan Board. And also that it delivered in terms of engaging local people in the projects and the progress that the local council was making. So that we did some research funded by PCAN to look at the sort of awareness that people had of their local authorities and what had been done. And we found that most people really see their local authority in terms of their recycling and their bin collection and their street lighting, and they don't realise the role that they have and do play in financing the infrastructure that we all rely on. And I think that's particularly become clear in the response to COVID-19. So coming through that process, we then started working with 3 pilot authorities, West Berkshire, Warrington and Leeds, who were all putting together initial sort of green bonds to test this idea and to put it out there into the market. And the first to launch was West Berkshire, who launched a £1 million bond in July. Warrington followed in August, and we're hoping that Leeds will follow a little bit after the Treasury review of the public works loan rates that are going to local authorities. And so each of those bonds was offering a 5-year investment, paying 1.2%, and making those payments, that interest payment and a bit of the capital back over those 5 years, so fully repaid over those 5 years, and each raising about £1 million. And so far we've raised, across the 2 bonds, we've raised about £1 million, and that £1 million has gone into developing solar power in the local authorities, but also is now being spent within West Berks to look at projects around biodiversity, reforestation, and so on. And I think what we've seen there is there's huge potential. So the members are very excited because the first time they've seen people really sort of engaged. The teams that are delivering the projects feel energized because they can see that people are putting their money behind these. We've had about 750 investors across the 2 bonds. We're also seeing cross-party support. So we're really starting to see the green agenda put front and center into the local political agenda on the back of seeing not just the sort of below the line comments that you would get in the local press, but actually seeing real people putting their money up to support these projects. So we're hoping that beyond Leeds, that there are now 30 councils that are looking at doing these types of bonds. But there are 260 councils that have announced a climate emergency. So we see potential for creating maybe 300 new green local investment banks through local authorities using these types of bonds. So at the moment, it's sort of early days. We're seeing investors coming in, and that's very exciting. But really, it's about how we now engage with those other local authorities and start to roll out these projects across the UK.
Bruce, thank you so much. It's so encouraging, really good to have some good news, and congratulations on the launch from both Berkshire and Warrington. Andy, a bit about what's going on in Leeds, which is also fascinating.
Thank you very much. We in Leeds have been absolutely immersed quite intensively in tackling these issues and trying to gain some traction in quite a complicated context, and obviously it's very fluid at the moment. So I thought I would abstract some kind of thoughts from our experiences before coming back to some of the specifics. The first one is that these green recovery discussions are happening now, or they have happened already to some extent, obviously. They've been fairly random at times, to be honest. It's been more about the scale of activities that are ready to go now than anything more strategic. That's welcome up to a point, but the integration of the green recovery discussion with the climate agenda hasn't been as full or as strategic as it might have been. I think also that local initiatives can't wait, given the urgency. They can't wait for national policy change. We've been waiting a long time for policy change in some areas, such as in retrofit, for example. We need to find ways of getting on with things despite national government rather than because of national government. That said, there is a real phenomenon, I think, which is that the prospect of national policy change can deter local action. There's scope for so much local innovation in various aspects of the climate emergency, but the idea that local government initiatives or local initiatives more broadly could be kind of blown out of the water by some clumsy national government policy change in a few years' time, is sometimes enough to stop them from happening. And retrofit is perhaps a good example, where, you know, the vacuum on retrofit, or the relative absence of a coordinated policy on retrofit is enough to stop, well, you know, the absence of national policy coming forward in that area is enough to stop cities from instigating their own retrofit schemes and then seeking investment for them in some other way. Another key principle here is the need for ambition, obviously. So that the green recovery package needs to be tailored to the needs of the climate emergency, obviously. And that means scale and pace are required, and sustainability or durability over time in that sense are also needed. And for us, that means a focus on programs as well as, or rather than, a project-based initiative. But somehow that ability to consolidate lots of projects into a program and then get funding for that program is absent, and that's a critical gap in our capability to raise funds to deliver on our carbon roadmap. Also then, you know, the whole initiatives need to be strategic, as we've said, not ad hoc, but instead guided by a place-based overview of needs and opportunities on the one hand, but crucially also risks. And this work that we've supported Nick and colleagues at Grantham in doing, you know, I think has been quite unusual in highlighting the risk areas, the communities or the sectors or even the companies at risk from the transition, and targeting support towards them to ensure that, you know, that the negative impacts of the transition are not felt as acutely as they might be otherwise. Linked to that, I think we need to be very proactive in this. We can't just sit back and wait for people to come to us or raise ideas or put in bids for funding, for example. Instead, there needs to be an active search for the opportunities and threats, and then a similarly active search for ways of tackling those. Another kind of guiding principle, I suppose, would be that this whole area needs to be done in a cohesive way. And there are two elements to this, I think. One is that there is a risk of cherry picking. And I think that's happened already in some of the green recovery packages or broader recovery packages that have cherry picked the easiest options. And that's good in a way, but it also leaves the risk that there'll be bigger challenges left behind. And at a local level, the ability to kind of cross-subsidize, if you like, to take the returns and the positive experiences from the easier options and then use those to help us tackle the harder options. That's a crucial dynamic here, and I worry that that's absent again, and the cherry picking actually is going to make things worse in the longer term because we lose that capability to cross-subsidize. And also then, and this picks up on something that Caroline said, I think we don't need to only focus on doing some of the right things, in other words, the low carbon or climate resilience projects and programs, but we also need to think about not doing some of the wrong things. Sometimes I think we are, you know, swimming, but, you know, seeming to make progress, but basically being washed away downstream because, you know, the power of the wrong things is greater than the impact of the right things from a low carbon perspective, for example. And then lastly, all of this needs to be mainstreamed. It's tempting to say that there's almost no use having tokenistic activities on the low carbon or climate resilience side when there are so many things, you know, pushing it in the other direction. But we really need to integrate this into the mainstream of local decision making and regional and then national decision making. Environment and climate can't be left to the environment and climate and sustainability community. It needs to be a key function of housing and transport and energy and regeneration and infrastructure and so on. And so this isn't about having standalone green projects, it's about integrating the green agenda fully into those other areas. So at a local level, I think we need place-based platforms to act as an intermediary to consolidate all of this thinking and then to guide our activities and to seek funding to support it. But there's a real question now about local capacities for action. I think the climate emergency has shown that local authorities did vacate this territory because of austerity and because of necessity for some years, until a couple of years ago. And then they've come back in very actively, which is obviously massively welcome. But now the next wave of austerity coming through, and we're beginning to see the impact of this very, very clearly in Leeds, is whether they will continue to have the capacity to do these kind of discretionary from a statutory perspective, things. And if they vacate the territory again, and smaller authorities or more rural authorities, I think this is already a reality. How are we going to deliver this then? Where's the capacity coming from? So local climate commissions, such as Leeds Climate Commission, were set up to bolster local capacity and to complement local authority powers. And I think that there will be a growing need for them again in the coming years. And what we've been doing is to focus very much on where the opportunities are, how ready we are to to address those opportunities, and finance is a key element of that. And our next stage is to pull all of that together at a city scale into an investment prospectus, which is underpinned by a pipeline of investable programs and projects over the next 10 years, which help us to deliver on our climate ambitions, as we said, in quite a strategic and ambitious and proactive way. So in Leeds, we're lucky, and PCAN is helping to support this more broadly in other areas, but there are many areas that don't have that capacity, and I think that those local capacities will be diminished in the years to come, and we really need to think about what we do in that kind of context.
Andy, thanks so much, and such an important question on thinking about how to ensure that the next wave of austerity does not further diminish the capacity of local authorities to be a critical part of this recovery. Thanks very much, some really interesting ideas again. And Casey, what's happening in Edinburgh? We've had one of the questions actually has come from somebody who's interested in getting a bond going in Edinburgh, so we'll come back to that shortly, but tell us a little bit about how you're seeing things from the Edinburgh Climate Commission perspective and what your expertise about climate finance can help us with today. Thank you.
Thank you for the lovely introduction. It's great to be here with you all today talking about this really important topic. So the perspective from Edinburgh, the Edinburgh Climate Commission was set up at the start of this year. There's 15 members on the commission, and we were really brought together to catalyse action, challenge decision makers, and convene stakeholders to try and create the conditions for successfully achieving our 2030 ambition of being net zero. But before we had the chance to meet at the start of this year, COVID-19 hit. We were initially prioritising bringing together stakeholders, and that kind of went out the window, and instead we refocused on what COVID-19 meant for the climate crisis and really reprioritised around that. And that's been the driving force underpinning our initial report, which was launched in May. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the key recommendations out of that report, but then what I would like to do is come on to some specific actions and time-bound actions as well. I think the difficult thing with being one of the last speakers on a panel is you're always so inspired by the people that have spoken before you, that you have so much to say in response to that, sometimes your notes go out the window. So thank you, Bruce and Andy, for adding to the list of things that I wanted to talk about this morning. So a little bit more about the Commission. So we've published a set of 5 principles, and all of this information is available online, and I'm sure we'll be able to share the report with you. Our key principles for Edinburgh are really action-based and have some explanation around them. I'll go through them quite quickly, and then on to some of our recommendations that relate more specifically to the finance sector. So we've recommended that Edinburgh go faster and accelerate the transition to net zero, locking in carbon reductions and low carbon behaviours and locking out a rollback to business as usual. That we need to do better, and that we need to measure what matters and judge success against more than just economic indicators and include biodiversity, well-being and carbon reductions. We need to build stronger. We've seen through COVID that we as cities are not as resilient as we would like to be. We need to unleash the potential of local communities and producers that we've seen arise in response to COVID and showcase innovation and positive adaptation. And I think the key ones for me are the next 2, which are around thinking bigger and being bolder. I think the key thing with COVID-19 that is broken the belief that big change can't be done. The scale of ambition and the breadth of our imagination and our commitment to collaborate and our willingness to embrace change must match the challenge of achieving net zero carbon emissions. And I think what we've seen in response to COVID is society and the economy respond to a crisis. And that's the kind of thing we haven't seen with climate change yet. And we need to take action that is commensurate with the challenge that's facing us. And the one around being bolder, I think it's really important that the UK recognise that it has a key role to play in the run-up to COP26, and that we should use our voice to set the pace for climate action, particularly in the field of finance, recognising the moral limits of markets and leading the debate on what a sustainable future might be. So as I said, these are our key underpinning principles, and there are 10 recommendations. I won't go through them all. They're very broad and cover all facets of the action that we need to take. But the 10th one is very specific to the finance sector. And our 10th recommendation is around being bold and innovative in supporting and enabling new funding models. And I think this is the one that plays into the conversation that we're having here today around place-based finance. I think there's a couple of key things that we see as being particularly relevant for Edinburgh, but equally read across to many cities across the UK and wider European regions too. One is that we need to pilot innovative investment models and mobilise capital for smaller scale projects. And I think through Abundance, we see a mechanism that can truly bring that into the council's remit. We also need to launch city transition bonds that incorporate sustainability metrics to put funding in the hands of councils and communities. And as many have mentioned before me, we need to unlock pensions and savings markets through policy interventions to align pension savings to net zero goals. So these are all very big, worthy ambitions, and you know, principles and recommendations will only get you so far. I think the key next step that we all need to take as participants in both the sustainability conversation, but also as financial professionals, is we need to take these worthy ambitions and turn them into action. So we've seen HM Treasury come out and consult on how we can help facilitate a green recovery, and we've seen investors from across the world. So 250 investor members with over 33 trillion in assets, as represented by the Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change, have called on HM Treasury to get a move on. We can absolutely see that by issuing green gilts or green sovereigns, that we can make a big difference in terms of channeling money to the right activities. From my perspective, 10 years ago, slightly over 10 years ago, we were willing to bail out banks and our economy through a massive program of QE. That is exactly the type of thing we should be doing again to ensure that we're funding a transition to a sustainable future that, importantly, we all want to live in. In terms of other actions that can help drive this forward, we have a dearth of financing available at the community level. In the US, we see a municipal bond market that eclipses our own pensions market. There is a wealth of funding potential there, and it crucially puts control in the hands of communities and councils, where they can prioritise and determine which projects need to go first and which projects meet the needs and the requirements of their communities and councils. I would like to pick up on one point made by Carolyn in her 5 recommendations on section 172 and changing the law around companies. I think that this is a great starting point, and cannot speak for other institutional investors, but it would certainly make my role in holding companies to account far easier if it was enshrined in law that they have a purpose beyond making profit. And I think that speaks to all of the discussions that are happening right now, whether that's in place-based discussions, whether it's HM Treasury or institutional investors. We're remembering and recognizing that the financial markets sit within our society, not the other way around, and that importantly our society sits within our environment. And we need to remember that the purpose of our financial markets was to shift capital to create the future that we want to live in, and at the moment we're not doing that. To put this into kind of monetary and financial terms, and I sometimes feel I repeat myself, we talk about not having enough money to do things and, you know, facing another wave of austerity. We absolutely cannot have another wave of austerity. We need to be investing for prosperity and for a sustainable future. Every year we're investing around £15 billion in our defined contribution pension funds. Where is that money going today? And how can we ensure that that money is building something that we want to invest in? And I can tell you where that money's going right now. Most pension funds in the UK are heavily skewed towards the UK market. And the top stocks in the UK market are Shell and BP. And so we, through our pensions, are funneling money right into the fossil fuel companies who are creating the problem. Part of the problem is that pensions, defined contribution pensions, are priced on a daily basis, and yet they represent the lifetime savings for the beneficiaries. There is a massive disconnect between the need for daily liquidity and the need to build a future that's worth living in, which needs long-term and patient capital. And these are the types of interventions that governments need to make soon in order to free up this pensions capital and create and unlock this wall of money that can help transition our economy to one that is both fair, just, equitable, and sustainable. I'm going to stop there. I still have loads of notes, but I'm assuming that there are going to be bunches of questions, and I will leave time for those. Thank you, Sophia.
Thank you so much, Casey. Really so interesting. And again, the urgency and the potential. That's the thing that's really striking me in what everybody's saying is, you know, we've got all the component parts here. It's how do we put them together and make them happen. So I'd like to invite Caroline also to come back on the screen, because I think that there may well be questions to you, Caroline. Great. So we've now got all the panelists up and we've had a number of questions. I'd like to suggest that we start actually, because we have the network here, a number of members who are with us are from the PCAN network. And we've also, as Caroline talked about the reset report that was put out yesterday, one of the questions was, do we need an effective lobbying network in order to towards central government? And I think that that is, we almost have it in the making. So I suppose I'd like to slightly reframe that question and ask Caroline and the other panelists, but particularly Caroline, how that voice, the concern, the sense of what's happening at a regional and a local level can be amplified in such a way as to make government sit up and think, actually, this is something we really need to respond to. So I'll just open the questions with that one and see what you think.
Thanks, Sophia. Well, I certainly agree with the premise of the question. Absolutely, we need to have a more united and a more powerful voice, I think. And one of the frustrations I always have around local authorities, actually, is that it doesn't feel to me as if there's a very united and powerful voice coming from local authorities. And we've talked a lot about the powers we would like them to have, about how we would like them to be maybe less risk averse and to be more pioneering. And I think they would take a lot more comfort as well if they were acting more in concert. The LGA, the Local Government Association, does a good job, but it doesn't really act in that way as a kind of a way of amplifying the voices of local authority leaders. So that's certainly one aspect that I think could make a real difference when it comes to giving government a little bit more confidence that there is a mandate for change. Because I think going back to the reset report, going back to the Climate Assembly conclusions, and indeed going back to so many joint letters and reports from business, it feels as if most people are kind of going in one direction, and that direction is saying we want bolder action. You know, you have a mandate to be bolder, and it's very interesting that the public and to some extent local government, but certainly business, are ahead of where government is on this, and I think ministers need to catch up. And maybe one way to do that would be, as you're suggesting, would be to join up these different voices. What the best vehicle is for that, I'm not sure. I've mentioned local authorities as one, but certainly I think that the concerted lobbying from a wider group of stakeholders perhaps will give the government a little bit more confidence in being bolder than it currently is in this space.
So Andy, Nick, I wonder whether you'd put your camera back on so that people know that you're available as well for questions. Andy, as one of the founder members of PCAN, was that type of activity envisaged just to be part of PCAN's remit?
Yes, I think it was. I think the idea was for PCAN to set up a core network of leading cities, Belfast, Edinburgh and Leeds initially, and then to grow that. And once we had a kind of critical mass, then to try and articulate the needs of local government more to national government. and I completely understand the logic for doing that. But on the other hand, I'd restate the point I made earlier, that you know, we could be a long time waiting for national policy to be set up to enable us to do the things we need to do. And I think we need to find workarounds at the moment, and perhaps show national government what can be done.
Yeah.
One request, you know, might be, you know, as I was saying about retrofit, is that, you know, it's been a long time since the Green Deal was effectively withdrawn, and you know, there's a little bit of progress with funding under the Green Stimulus package, but we're still a long way from having a coherent retrofit standard or approach available. So rather than asking national government for one, I think it would be better if local government could show these are the kind of schemes we can do if you just get out of the way. And maybe that's a little bit hubristic, but I think, as I say, for the life of this Parliament, we may be waiting a while for them to really, you know, put the policies in place that we need. So that perhaps is the only option we have available to us.
Right. And do anybody, any of the other panelists have any views on this balance between just getting on with it and, I mean, they're absolutely not mutually exclusive, but I guess there's a question about, were there to be more concerted action? Could that change the current trajectory? Any other views from the panelists? Casey, you look like you've just come in. And then Bruce, you.
Yeah, I definitely think there is more room for lobbying from local councils. What I would say is that I think certainly across the finance sector, the lobbying position has been pretty strong, particularly in terms of the HM Treasury consultation. So I would be very disappointed if we didn't see the Chancellor doing something in the next 12 months to kickstart the green bond market. I'd be very disappointed if we don't see green gilts in the next 12 months. It's not just institutional investors, it's the Climate Financial Risk Forum. We're all calling on the same thing. So if they're being slow, it's because they're being deaf. They need to listen, and they need to be doing the things that they're being lobbied to do, because I don't really see what the other path is going to be. And whether that's lobbying from institutional investors like myself or lobbying from local governments, I don't know how much more we need to shout at them before they will listen. And I guess that's my naivety with politics showing through there.
Thank you. Bruce, did you want to come in here?
Just 2 points. I think the first one is that, yeah, we've seen you know, cross-party interest. So all colours of councils getting involved in terms of wanting to issue green bonds, and then when they do, we're getting cross-party member support for the projects themselves. And I think in terms of action, then a lot of these authorities have a list of things they need to do and need to finance. So, and those are democratically decided and accountable and so on. I'll pick up later on. There's some questions around scale and stuff I can pick up later. But I think in terms of this lobbying, I think it's also, you know, at these different points in time, what you find is that the finance system, there's lobbying of the incumbent system, but I think we also need to just say, let's get on and do and create the alternative system. All right, so we've had building societies, they had to fill in a gap. For me, the local authority, municipal bonds, they can do a similar job in terms of the green recovery. So it's also about showing that those alternatives need support. And I think at the moment, yeah, that lobbying also needs to be done, because there are some things happening that are holding back that development, because as I said, the purpose of the finance system isn't being sufficiently considered in the way we think about regulation and legislation of finance.
Great. We've had a number of questions on bonds, and ranging from, has there been resistance from local authorities? Does the Treasury have a view on local authorities underwriting these bonds in some ways? What can the bonds be used for? You know, there was a suggestion that they may be used for green infrastructure like cycle lanes and things. And there's also the national bond conversation. So Nick, you mentioned a national bond in your presentation. So it seems like there's a lot of interest in this, and it would be good to get a sense from the panelists about, you know, what's getting in the way, what might accelerate the potential here, how to get the national again and the regional and the local to marry and to be at least in the terms of bonds to be issued simultaneously, I guess. So I'd just like to suggest that we spend a little bit of time on this issue of bonds, how to make them successful, what is the key element, and perhaps Bruce, given that you've just spoken, I mean, I know that this is your area of expertise, but I'd like to just go to Nick first and then invite him to talk about the idea of a national bond, and to invite Caroline to come back on screen because we've lost you briefly. Nick, would you like to start?
Thanks, Sophia, and really building on sort of what Casey was just saying. I mean, all the experience I have is that sort of national governments issuing green sovereign bonds is now seen to be increasingly common practice in other European countries. We've just had Germany issue a green Bund, Sweden earlier this week, Mexico did as well. France it has become a sort of really core part of that. And clearly at the moment, we are issuing unprecedented amounts of sovereign debt to pay for the sort of relief packages. And I think this is seen, as Casey was saying, by investors as being absolutely central. So I think the issues that are blocking it are some sort of technical issues, I think, and all of those can be overcome in terms of the structuring of it. So I would be fairly confident that this will be coming soon. And I think what could be interesting in the situation we're finding ourselves is not just raising money from savers, from pension funds and so on, and then allocating that to green, but also doing it in a way which really can direct some of the proceeds into areas of high deprivation and into the building of skills and so on. And then I think also, because sovereign bonds are pretty much held by everybody, I think also help that to stimulate municipalities, businesses and so on to do more. So it really could have a signal effect, and that would be a great announcement to have at the budget and intent, and then lead that all the way through up to COP, and not just a one-off, but a program of sovereign bond issuance through the next decade and beyond. And I really struck, maybe we'll come back to it, but I think this question of actually how we develop a sort of thriving bond market in the UK. The UK is actually very good in terms of helping other countries do green bonds, but actually we're relatively weak in terms of that in the UK itself. It's a puzzle to me, and so I think that could be a real focus, bringing the people on this call together, how we do that. Municipalities, as Casey was saying, and Bruce has been pioneering, but also businesses, large and small.
Great. Thank you very much. I think I might have to turn my camera off in order for Caroline to come back on. But anyway, Bruce, over to you. What's getting in the way? What might make this work better?
Well, I think the work that we did in the Financing Society was really about removing those barriers, actually. So nothing, actually. What's getting in the way is just people waiting to see these as successful. So the barriers were that it had to be cheaper than PWLB, which it is, that it had to be simple. We've made it simple. There's a template. Everyone can use the same template. So it's a program. It had to be low risk because this is for everybody. So a £5 minimum investment. And I think the last bit there is that the big innovation was to detach the project risk. So these are not project bonds. These are bonds that are backed by the local authority. And I'll come on to the underwriting point in a minute. They're backed by the local authority, and so therefore they are low risk. In the technical jargon, they're sub-sovereign. So they are based on the local authority's ability to raise tax revenues and revenues to repay the bonds, and technically a local authority cannot go bankrupt. So from that perspective, it makes them, we've addressed a number of those barriers. I think then in terms of scale, because we're not addressing project risk, you're able to scale these up to the borrowing levels that local authorities have, which are within the prudential borrowing frameworks. And our bonds are done on the basis that local authorities are currently borrowing from UK government. So we're working in the same framework. So we're not talking about extending borrowing, we're talking about making sure it's focused on the right things and doing that on the basis that the local authority have said, this is what we're going to do. They've gone public with that, and therefore they're going to follow through. Otherwise, voters will vote them out. So I think we've addressed some of those structural issues, which in the sort of conventional crowdfunding model, and we did 10 megawatts of solar with Swindon originally in 2016 through a corporate model. This is different. This is a municipal bond, and it is therefore backed by the local authority. So yeah, that underwriting piece, the local authorities are backing the bond in the same way and on the same terms as they are borrowing both from the private sector, but in the main from UK government. And local authorities have no limit in a sense, other than the affordability of that, and their responsibility as financial officers, particularly, is to make sure that their borrowing that they take on is within those affordability limits, which, given interest rates are very low at the moment, are greater than they've been in the past.
And just the question on any restrictions on what these bonds can be used for. I mean, there was a question about green infrastructure and.
Well, it's whatever the local. So
yeah.
So because we're just replacing the PWRB, there are no restrictions.
Yeah.
It's the local authority and their democratic process that decides what to spend the money on, and the return. The local authority may well be making a profit or a surplus from some of these investments. So in the case of Warrington, they will earn £100 million over 30 years from their 3 big solar investments they've made. We're funding a part of that. But that's not something that the investors need to concern about. They need to be concerned about how much borrowing has the local authority got, and can it afford that borrowing over the life of the bond.
And there's a question here about creating programmatic funding for small transition projects, which is related, obviously, or can be related to the issuance of municipal bonds. And I guess, so the question here might be also about the relationship between local authority bonds and how they work possibly with community development finance organisations or equivalent who might be able to triage some of the smaller projects. Is that something you've thought about?
Well, I think that's all possible. I think these are programmatic in the sense that you make them look the same in terms of the financial investment, and then the usage can be varied, and they can be bought by institutions as much as they can be bought by individuals. So I think what we're hoping is that this, through the sort of mediation of the local authority, we can support, we're supporting things like the local wildlife trust. There are plenty of actors who can then benefit from this spending. We're just, we're moving on from the model where we thought about green investment before, which is very much driven in the green energy space of thinking about the investment within the project. We're now saying this is about achieving net zero.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to move back to the national level now. I think that all the questions will take us to and fro to some extent. There are 2 questions here at that level. One of them is around, asking where the issue around a national investment bank has got to. And Nick, perhaps you would address that, because I think you know the answer to that. And then there's a question here about the establishment of the impact investing institution, and whether it's been helpful in bringing institutional investors to meet the needs you express at scale. And Casey, that seems to be one that speaks to the issues that you were raising to some extent. I mean, everybody's invited to answer any questions. Don't let me stop you if you've something to say, but I'm just suggesting who might start the answers. So Nick, perhaps we go to you on the investment bank to begin with. And indeed the impact investing institution, the Impact Investing Institute.
Well, I'd be really interested to hear Caroline's views from Parliament actually about National Investment Bank. I mean, I think what is really striking, again, I think is one where COVID has really changed the rules of the game, is actually you now have, I think, leading banks and investors saying we need this National Investment Bank. So it's not seen as a sort of a competing institution, but is a crucial organisation which we're going to need, particularly because we no longer have access to the European Investment Bank, and also because we've got to build a new economy. So I think sort of maybe hesitations before, and I've been very struck by very, very high level support for a National Investment Bank from banks, from investors and so on, that this is a missing piece of our financial architecture. So I mean, I think there's a growing groundswell of that, and I think being reflected in the chat. And as I was suggesting, I mean, one of the things, again, to add to the green bond area is that the National Investment Bank, when set up, the government would have to endow it, but actually would then be issuing green bonds and so on, and could work with regions, could work with local authorities, work with businesses on this side. Impact Investing Institute, I think exactly yes, from my experience, I think there's a really interesting area in terms of bringing together the two institutes we now have in the UK, the Green Finance Institute on the green side and the Impact Investing Institute. And I think there's lots of really good synergies to bring these two things together. And I think, so yes, very, very good there. But interesting to hear what others are saying on these things.
Yeah, so let's go to Caroline now on the National Investment Bank from a Westminster perspective. Why haven't we got this already?
The only argument that I could cite is just a kind of ideological opposition to things that are public banks. You know, I mean, that's one of the reasons that the Green Investment Bank was flogged off to Macquarie in the first place. I mean, it was doing a perfectly good job. It was quite extraordinary that it was sold off. But I do agree with Nick. I think that there is now a recognition that there is a gap in the jigsaw, and as he said, particularly with the with not being able to access the European Investment Bank in the same way, I think the need for this is going to become more obvious. I think all of the opposition parties are completely agreed that we need such a bank, and I've certainly been interested to hear from a number of select committee evidence sessions that more and more people are giving that evidence, and it feels to me that there would be a majority in favour of such a proposal. I've not heard of any specific plans from government to bring that forward, but it does feel a no-brainer, just as the green bond issue feels like a no-brainer as well. So I hope that just in the sense that COVID has changed so much of what we think is possible or not possible. I mean, this is a government that just cancelled £13 billion of NHS debt overnight, so they are able to do surprising things quite quickly when circumstances make it necessary. And I hope they will see this in the same frame. I wanted to just say one very quick thing to Bruce and Andy, who we've had this sort of discussion about whether or not you work at a national level or a local level or both. And as you said, I think there's no reason why you don't do both. But I would just say on the local authority side of it, even though everything that Bruce has said is such a no-brainer, it's so obvious this is the thing to do, there is still resistance from local authorities. I know from my own local authority, and I've been a councillor as well. And I just think we shouldn't underestimate risk aversion, even when there is no risk. And I take your point that this is a less risky thing to do than taking money from the Public Works Loan Board. But somehow I think we need to get the legal officers of lots of those councils together and give them a really good briefing so that we can have all councils moving in this direction at pace, because there is an urgency to this, obviously. And it's fantastic to see what the pioneer councils are doing, but somehow we need to make that the baseline for nearly all councils, not just something that we see from the best ones.
And just on that, in another life, I did a project on financial literacy in the UK. And one of the things that is really striking is, and it goes back to your point, the point that you made at the start, Caroline, about the invisibility of finance. I think that there is such a mystique around finance in this country, and people are very frightened of the idea that you might take control of something that feels so difficult. And I think one of the challenges for a network like PCAN or any concerted effort to try and address this is to make the point that you just made, that actually this is something that people can get much more involved with without risking limited savings, which I think does frighten people, or in some way mismanaging other people's limited savings. So I think that's a huge part of this piece, actually. And there was a question here about what researchers might look into, and I think perhaps my answer would partly be looking at that, how to empower people to feel more able to engage with finance. I think would be a really good thing to do.
We have a PhD student who's looking at that question also in terms of the social value, because I think it's also about repositioning finance. I mean, in reality, we've just, by the end of this year, citizens will have lent 200 billion to the UK government through national savings. That's the biggest amount it's ever been. We didn't get beyond 24 billion in the war. But national savings has a particular way of making you feel good about the fact that you're lending money to the government. All we need to do is to create the local national savings and that feeling, which has been around, as I said, since 1870. These things are not new. There's nothing new in finance. It's just reinvention. And it's making people comfortable again that that's what they have. And it's interesting, when we started with Leeds, the finance officer could remember as a junior clerk filling out the paper certificates for local investors. And yes, what we brought to them was the ability to do it through the internet and make it easy and cheap again. But local authorities have done this for for 150 years. And I think, yes, we do. That is the barrier. So the Financing for Society we've got a guide for local authorities. They can go through a decision tree to see what is the right form of funding they can provide for the projects that they have. And that is slowly, as I said, bringing people on. We've got about 30 and actively talking about it, and probably another sort of 30 who are watching very closely how this goes.
Thank you. So Casey, I did invite you to come in on the Impact Investment Institute, but I also would like to invite you to come in on the BP question. So there are a couple of questions about whether we should be taking BPs, and especially given what you were saying about, as you're rightly, quite how much of UK savings are invested in the two, BP and Shell. Should we be happy with recent moves? Are we to be thinking that
let's do the easy one first. Let's do the easy one first and talk, if I might, about the Impact Investing Institute and a national investment bank. I think again they're all great additions or great concepts. My concern is that we don't have enough time. How long will it take to set up a national investment bank? Because we see how long it takes for things to get through Parliament. Parliament seems quite busy and distracted by other things at the moment, quite rightly. How long would it take, and can we afford to wait that long? I absolutely support the concept of a national investment bank. I just don't think we can wait until that is there in order to take action. On the Impact Investing Institute, we welcome the Impact Investing Institute and also the Green Finance Institute. I think what it does speak to, and this is maybe a point that Andy made earlier, we in sustainable finance like to split hairs about sustainable finance and impact investing and responsible investing, and just make it even more confusing than it already is, and nobody likes investing as it is, so do we really need to make it more confusing? And when I was explaining it to my children, because children kind of get this stuff, they were like, why are you spending so much time like extolling the virtues of good finance? Why don't you just point at all the other stuff and call it bad? You don't put health warnings on carrots, you put health warnings on cigarettes and pizzas. And I think for too long, the sustainable finance industry has spent too much time extolling the virtues, and perhaps it needs to be pointing in the other direction and saying, do you actually realize where your money is going? Which then kind of segues into the question on BP, because that is where the money is going. And is it bad or is it not? And so you have a big debate in the institutional investment community about, do you try and green your portfolio, so just get rid of all the bad stuff and invest in wind farms, or do you try and green society? If you're a small investor, if you're an individual, you can green your portfolio. But if you're an institutional investor with hundreds of billions or trillions to invest, then you need to take your responsibility seriously. And part of that is challenging the companies that you're investing in and reminding them that you own them. There is this kind of ego bit that happens when you go talk with a chairman and a board, until they remember, oh, hang on a minute, we're supposed to be fulfilling your wishes. And through the kind of democratization of finance, if you've got a pension, you own shares, you are now the owners of these companies, and they're supposed to listen to you. And so with BP, what we did as institutional investors is we put forward a shareholder resolution to instruct them and say, we as shareholders want you to align this company to the ambitions of the Paris Agreement. That's your new mandate, please do that. And you can see that they are making changes. Is it enough? Probably not. Is it a good start? Absolutely. Is it making the right noises? Absolutely. And is it going further than perhaps the government has so far? Yes. I mean, they're now calling for limits on the sale of fossil fuel vehicles. Not something we would have imagined previously. But that's the role of institutional investors, is really reminding companies that we're the owners, and that companies and finance plays a role in society, not the other way around. We're not just their resources for them to make profit. Yeah. And can you trust them? Not necessarily. You got to keep holding their feet to the fire and reminding them that human beings own them.
Great. So we're sadly 5 minutes from the end. I'd like to give each of the panelists a chance to think of, is there one thing that you would like us to take away, one final takeaway message that you think is really important, that this very rich discussion would benefit from thinking about how we practically make this happen, you know, picking up on the urgency that came right from the start when Caroline gave her talk all the way through. There is an urgency here which we really have to act on. So invite everybody. And Nick, can I suggest that you close so that, because you can tell people about the next steps for this particular project. So perhaps, Caroline, can we start with you? Is there something, a final message that you would like us to take away and act on? Or somebody else to act on, but final thought.
I'm just remembering as you say that this is the question I should have thought of at the beginning, because I'm struggling slightly. I mean,
Shall I come back to you?
No, don't worry, it won't help. Two quick things maybe then I would say. One is just building on what we've just been saying about some of the barriers to action, and the fact that they're not necessarily rational ones, but they are about this sense that people have that finance is something that's very mysterious, over which they don't have any real influence, and it feels scary. And I think that does sort of come out by omission from the Citizens Assembly report, and indeed from our own reset report. Then I guess from where all of us are starting from, perhaps, is to recognise that rational arguments on their own aren't enough, that we need to kind of take on board people's understandable reluctances and fears and just lack of confidence in certain areas, and that we need to kind of speak to that. And so I think that needs to be part of it. But the other thing I would do, and this is just cheating a little bit, is just to maybe pull out one of the recommendations I made in my opening words, which was that, you know, coming back to making a challenge for the Bank of England, and whether or not we could all kind of build this into some of the work that we're doing. You know, if they were to be able to redefine the good of the people, it would unlock a lot. And not everything by all means, and of course lots can happen at the local level, and it does happen at the local level. But in order to be able to act at the speed and the scope that we do need an enabling national framework, I think, as well, to build things up, to scale them up, to speed them up. And so therefore changing that Bank of England objective and explaining what we mean by the good of the people, like having a livable planet, I think would be a good place to start.
Brilliant, thank you. Bruce?
I think I echo that point on the key thing here is that the financial system sees that it also needs to have a purpose and not just exist, and that the Bank of England, 99% of it is sort of keeping the wheels moving, but that 1% should be greater, that is thinking about where the vehicle is actually going. And I think that the more, you know, and financial institutions are mechanistic beasts, that we do what we're told according to regulation. And I think that there are significant barriers to this change in our regulation as it's currently formed. And I don't think that the conversation we're having around regulation is thinking about that. It's actually thinking about risk aversion and not about purpose. And I think you do that after you've decided the purpose, because then you know what risk you're prepared to take. And at an individual level, that's the same. When I talk to my investors, they made this jump, if you like, to green because they worked out that the purpose was fundamental. And then you work out what risk you can take in your own financial needs. And I think the financial system needs to do the same.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Andy?
I think we need to keep focused on the need to deliver deep transformations within the next decade, really, in order to respond effectively to the climate emergency. And in a way, I think necessity will be the mother of invention. And, you know, there are some elements that have perhaps been a little underemphasized today, resilience being one of them, and even the just transition elements and the downside risks of this, I suppose, for some sectors and communities, and finding ways to help them to make the transition and so win them over, actually, and get them on board for the transition agenda. But I would say that, you know, one of the single most exciting things absolutely in Leeds is the green bond. I think that what we need to do with that is to get it out there as quickly as possible, but then to learn the lessons from it as quickly as possible so that we can scale it. You know, so that it gets up to the kind of level of investment that we need within a year or two, really, to really start driving the transition. And then that kind of success story is contagious, isn't it? It spreads, and you know, that can be the example that then perhaps makes us more able to drive national policy change and to have the enabling framework that Caroline has just suggested.
Perfect, thank you. Casey, before we go to Nick.
I would echo the point on green bonds. So I think we need to make it action-based and time-bound. So I think we need to rapidly accelerate the development of a supportive UK green bond market that facilitates investment from individuals right through to institutional investors, and that the government must take the lead on that and must commit to redirecting QE and issuing a green gilt in the next 12 months. And to unlock the scale and ambition that we need ahead of COP26, and to show that we're serious. We don't have time. We have 10 years, it's a decade of action. We need to be taking action in the next 12 months to make this happen.
Thank you, Casey. Nick, where are we on the project? And before you start, I'd like to thank all the panelists. I know you're going to do that again, but I would like to thank you from my point of view too. So Nick, over to you.
Well, thank you. And this has been really stimulating. I think one of the things that as I was listening to people and some of the chat as well, was in a sense, we don't yet have that sort of a ladder with all the steps from the local 1 million community municipal investments up to the trillions. And I think over the next year, certainly within PCAN at the local level, but also in this new finance and just transition group on the road to COP, I think we want to make sure we have all those steps in place. So we have the local bonds, the pension funds, the structures, National Investment Bank, and so on, to put all those things in place. So very, very stimulating, I think. And I'm certainly the PCAN team, Andy, which you helped set up, or you set up, I think really can think about what we can do. And I think some of these briefings, confidence building and so on, will certainly be part of that. So very much like to thank Caroline for setting us off, Casey, Bruce, Andy, and indeed Sophia, yourself, for chairing so well.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your days.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye now.